Good morning and welcome to the Clean Cities webinar series. This is an introduction to renewable liquid fuels, Part 1, Basics, Costs, Benefits of Renewable Diesel, Biodiesel, and Blends. Hello and welcome to the first of a series of Clean Cities webinars. Today we are exploring one of the most versatile fuels in the clean fuels portfolio. With upwards of 90% of our medium and heavy-duty transportation in America being moved by diesel, we certainly can see the impact of this heavy-emitting fossil fuel. Adding, or as we will learn today, completely replacing traditional diesel fuel with renewable diesel and biofuels is a sound and practical solution. This is our agenda for today. As a moderator, I have the privilege of sharing some of the most amazing and fleet transforming opportunities that can benefit you and your fleet if you choose to work with your local and regional Clean Cities program. We are excited to present our speakers, Richard Battersby, David Slade, Brian Deniger, and Rick Wallace. And we are also delighted to have you join us at the end of this webinar to participate in a question and answer period that will be hosted by Columbia Willamette's Clean Cities Coalition and Michael Graham. Please use the chat box to ask any questions, and we will address them at the end of the program. I would like to welcome today's speakers. Richard Battersby, who will go first. He's the director of the East Bay Clean Cities Coalition. Dr. David Slade, who is the executive director of Biofuels Technology and Services with the Renewable Energy Group. We have Brian Deniger, who's the president of Dogpatch Biofuels, and Rick Wallace, the Senior Policy Analyst, Oregon Department of Energy. Our mission: Clean Cities Coalitions foster the economic, environmental, and energy security of the United States by working locally to advance affordable domestic transportation fuels, energy-efficient mobility systems, and other fuel-saving technologies and practices. This program has been in existence for over 25 years in many states and continues to grow and innovate with our federal program, the Department of Energy Vehicle Technologies Office, and the full Clean Cities Network, which works with the teams at the national laboratories, with our industry partners, and most importantly, the public and private fleets that fuel and drive our nation's transportation system. There are over 90 Clean Cities coalitions in the United States. And each Clean Cities Coalition model consists of local coalitions fostering change in their communities with the help of federal resources and expertise. In the previous slides, I provided you with a formal overview of our program and stated our mission statement. This slide, "There are no perfect fuels, but there are common sense solutions," is a motto that many of us use in our working everyday life. At Clean Cities, we are fuel neutral. We work with over 12 advanced and alternative fuels and are always open to new and emerging technologies. We are watching hydrogen again and see great promise with all of the renewables and the fuels that we are going to discuss today. The Clean Cities program has set the stage for major transformation. The Clean Cities programs are here to support you with education, expertise, and experience. From total cost of ownership to infrastructure development and driver training, please tap into your Clean Cities program for more information on programming, incentives, and grant funding. A choice at the pump is the primary goal of the Clean Cities program. Working closely with the Federal Highway Administration and our local DOTs, the Clean Cities programs are working to complete corridors and fill the gaps to ensure all of these advanced fuels shown here are readily available for fleets. We offer biofuels, electricity, ethanol, hydrogen, natural gas, and propane autogas along our corridors. There are over 31,000 alternative fuel stations in the United States, filling our cities and towns with a choice at the pump and completing the alternative fuel corridors across the nation. The Clean Cities programs report on all new station openings and closings, thus providing an excellent and verifiable up-to-date account of the fueling infrastructure for fleets. Both public and private stations are documented. This is an excellent resource for emergency response with advanced alternative fuel vehicles such as busing, shuttles, and also the emergency response vehicles themselves. Our programs are funded in part by the Department of Energy Vehicle Technology programs. The DOE grant programs are the foundational support of our work and offer an excellent funding source for projects. Our programs help bring federal, state, and private dollars to the roadmap of advanced transportation. and they provide the seed money for pilot projects, thus allowing for innovative advanced fuel vehicle deployment across the nation and certainly in your state. Without this support, many of the alternative fuel corridors would simply not exist. We can directly link the advancement we see today to the Clean Cities program, supported by our national laboratories and our industry partners, which has further supported the deployment avenues that are essential to private and public stakeholders and their fleets and the supportive infrastructure. This has helped break our nation's tremendous dependence on fossil fuels and imported oils and set the stage for clean, fossil-free fuels. As educational outreach organizations, we work with educating our local leaders and decision makers, ensuring those messages are heard on a state and federal level. Incentives, laws, and regulations are just some of the areas we educate and support our programs through direct education, outreach, and personal engagement. We do not lobby, but we do have a voice through our partnership with TEP, the Transportation Energy Partners. Each year we meet with our delegates in DC at the Energy Independence Summit to talk about our local and state projects. This effort has a huge impact on the decisions made in our federal and state leaders who focus on advanced fuels. Tax incentives, renewable fuel standards, the continued funding of our Clean Cities programs, all of these are not guaranteed, but they are certainly growing, and we appreciate your support of our good work. We are watching closely as the stimulus monies are certain to be part of all of the future of transportation projects and related to the Advanced and Alternative Fuels program. We appreciate your work and support as we move forward. A final slide, I want to introduce you all to the Alternative Fuels Data Center. This is an incredible resource for fleets and fleet managers. You can research fuels and vehicles, you can compare vehicles side by side and understand the total cost of ownership and return on investment. You can also dive in deeper to those station locator tools. It gives you an opportunity to see where the corridors are missing pieces and where they're pending and where they're complete. It also gives you the opportunity to reach out to stakeholders to help complete those corridors. And further, it allows you to connect with your local Clean Cities and follow us and join in with our work. We welcome the opportunity to help you roll down the road of advanced fuel, and we're happy to have you with us. Let's move on to our speakers.
To introduce Richard Batterby, he will be our first speaker. He is the director of the East Bay Clean Cities Coalition.
Well, thank you all for joining us today. I'm Richard Battersby. I'm the director of the East Bay Clean Cities Coalition, and I'm also with the City of Oakland Public Works as a renewable diesel user for 5 years, and I'm going to give you a brief overview on renewable diesel. Those of you that already heard about renewable diesel, you're probably already familiar with this. Renewable diesel is a replacement for petroleum diesel. It's a drop-in fuel. You can use it in any diesel equipment and any diesel storage equipment without modifications. It can be used in any blends with either petroleum diesel or biodiesel, so it's okay to mix any one of those three fuels in any quantities. Renewable diesel is considered a second-generation alternative diesel fuel, biodiesel being the first generation. And as I mentioned, it requires no vehicle modifications or infrastructure modifications. But one thing to be clear, renewable diesel's not biodiesel. They're both excellent fuels. Clean Cities is fuel agnostic. There's not one perfect fuel for any situation, but we like to inform everyone about the options that are available to them. The main difference between renewable diesel and biodiesel is the production process. Renewable diesel is made in a more traditional refining process, which uses heat and pressure, whereas biodiesel uses trans-esterification process, which is basically chemical reactions. But both fuels are made from the same feedstocks. When I talk about feedstocks, that's just the source of the product that the fuel is made from. These are all common sources of both biodiesel and renewable diesel, but the most commonly available versions of renewable diesel are made from waste animal fats and also used cooking oil. So these are the waste products that don't have a lot of use. Some of these are used to make soap, but it's not taking away from the food supply. There are some concerns expressed at times about renewable diesel made from crude palm oil, and I believe the industry is taking steps to address those concerns regarding deforestation. But currently in California, the low carbon fuel standard has no authorized pathways for fuel made from crude palm oil, so those fuels are not being used in California. The unique thing about renewable diesel and also biodiesel being made from waste products, it allows an opportunity to engage in circular economy. And this is fundamentally previously known as a closed loop. That's where the waste is produced in an area, converted to a renewable or reusable product, and then brought back into the area for reuse. In this instance, the City of Oakland is the source of waste, grease, and used cooking oil that is then taken to the renewable diesel refinery where it's turned into renewable diesel, and then that very fuel is returned to the City of Oakland for use in the City of Oakland vehicles. Again, it's a circular economy concept. You'll be hearing more about this in the future. Those of you that aren't really familiar with renewable diesel may have some questions. It's perceived as a new fuel. Oddly enough, it's been in use in California in significant quantities for at least 9 years. You can see by the charts, renewable diesel had been introduced into the California petroleum fuel supply as far back as 2011 to meet the low carbon fuel standard requirements of that state. So if you've been using petroleum diesel in California in the last 9 years, you've also been using renewable diesel. And again, just a chart showing the perspective nationwide, biodiesel and renewable diesel imports. You can see the activity starts taking place around 2011, 2012, continuing to the future. You may be asking yourself, why is this important to me? If you read the little paragraph on the left, I'm not going to read it to you. It basically is stating that the renewable diesel fuel supply is projected to increase domestic production capacity, but worldwide, we're anticipated to be somewhere near 3 billion gallons of renewable diesel by 2025. And again, renewable diesel being a drop-in fuel that can take the place of petroleum diesel overnight. The market has recognized this, the petroleum fuel industry has recognized this, and there's significant activities taking place to increase production. Again, why is this important to me? The graphics on the left are just snapshots that I took out on the street. Renewable diesel's available retail in the state of California, and not just at boutique fuel suppliers. You can see 76 has their own renewable diesel. It's branded 76. The Excel spreadsheet is a table, and it's probably not comprehensive because I made it, but it just indicates the existing renewable diesel capacity. Every existing renewable diesel facility in the United States is undergoing some sort of an expansion. In the middle of the table, it shows all the new facilities that are coming online in North America, or actually the United States. And I also included Canada at the bottom just to show that there is an incredibly heightened interest in this fuel. So it's important to you as a fleet manager to be aware of what's available on the market. And that's why you're on this presentation today. How does renewable diesel compare to ULSD, ultra low sulfur diesel? Very similar. You can see the cetane rating above. It's better than petroleum diesel and biodiesel. The energy density is very similar to petroleum diesel, not a significant advantage, and the energy content is quite similar. The cloud point also, with the additives, renewable diesel can be a very good winter fuel, but you have to remember to spec the winter blend if that's the fuel that you want to use. And what are the emission benefits? The table on the left shows the blue bar represents petroleum diesel, and the other bars represent renewable diesel from various sources. The one most commonly used in California has a carbon intensity of about 30. So you get right about a 70% emission reduction. But more significantly, the PM emission reduction is at 30%. And that's significant because the particulate matter is a carcinogenic, and it also causes all kinds of problems with your diesel particulate filters. So I've got a real quick little video here that visually shows the difference between renewable diesel and petroleum diesel. And these are basically Petri dishes of both products side by side, and you can visually see the reduced emissions from the renewable diesel on the left. So why is the particulate matter reduction so important? Those DPFs and particulate traps on your diesel vehicles are designed to keep the PM matter from entering the atmosphere, and they work by filtering it. So that PM that comes off of your engine gets trapped in your DPF. A 30% reduction in the PM going into your DPF translates to a greatly reduced need to do manual regens and cuts down on your operation and maintenance costs. We will have an additional module in the future that delves into this particular aspect. So you might be thinking to yourself, hey, this renewable diesel sounds almost too good to be true. What am I missing? Fundamentally, having been in the alternative fuel industry for about 20, 25 years, this is a once-in-a-lifetime fuel that comes along. There are no modifications required to use in your vehicle or your storage equipment. It's chemically indistinguishable from petroleum diesel, and the same storage and regulatory requirements apply. It cannot void any manufacturer's engine warranty because it is the same chemical chain as petroleum diesel. And it's got very competitive performance criteria such as the cetane and the cold weather clouding point. It has been imported in large quantities, and to make it even better, in California, renewable diesel is cost competitive with petroleum diesel. In some instances, it's even less. And it's currently available retail throughout California. And let's not forget that renewable diesel can be blended in any quantity with either petroleum diesel or biodiesel. And actually, renewable diesel, biodiesel blends are fairly popular as well, and can actually have a lower overall carbon intensity than straight renewable diesel, depending on the source. So it's important that you do your research when you're making a selection of an alternative fuel to use. And finally, another striking visual. This is the City of Oakland's fuel use. The slices of the pie represented in blue are alternative or renewable fuels. And also we've added electricity and hydrogen since this slide. So we're pretty close to 50% alternative or renewable fuel production. But prior to using renewable diesel, the red represents our petroleum diesel consumption. So overnight, we took a huge slice of that pie of our fuel use and made it renewable alternative fuels. So with that, I will conclude my presentation. There's some resources listed here. Please follow the links or feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Richard. That is so inspiring. I especially love the last bit of the slide where you were able to just create a 50% alternative fuel use by popping in renewable diesel. Fantastic. That was a great image. Up next, we have Dr. David Slade. He's the Executive Director of Biofuel Technology and Services with the Renewable Energy Group. I had the honor of touring that refinery a couple of years ago, and it was so impressive. And the work that they do is so incredible. And the product that they put out is top notch. So I can't say enough good things about REG. So Dr. Slade, welcome today, and thank you.
So thank you again. That was a very nice introduction. Just so everyone knows, we do produce both biodiesel and renewable diesel, and we have been marketing blends of the two successfully on the West Coast for the last couple of years. So Richard set things up perfectly for me. He actually did some of the hard work, and I'm going to build on a little bit of that. We hadn't seen each other's slides, so you'll get a slightly different version of what he said, which will help, I think, fill in the picture for everybody. So because we do make both of these fuels, I'm going to give you a very quick overview about how we can make two such different fuels from the same feedstocks. And Richard showed a picture of different feedstocks used for renewable diesel. We use exactly the same feedstocks for biodiesel as well. But generally speaking, at a high level, the chemical name for fats and oils is triglycerides. I won't go into this in too much detail here because of time, but just know that the tri refers to fatty acids. So these long gray chains here with the white bumps on them, the white bumps are hydrogen, the gray things are carbon atoms, and then the red spheres are oxygen atoms. So we turn these triglycerides into either renewable diesel or biodiesel depending on the production technology. The long carbon chains, the fatty acids, become the fuel molecules, And then this backbone that's holding those three fatty acids together is a glycerin or glycerol molecule. And so that is a byproduct of both biodiesel production and a slightly different byproduct for renewable diesel production. So I'm going at the molecular level. Remember, Richard gave us the high level showing the process. So to make biodiesel from fats and oils, we start with triglycerides, and we actually react them with methanol. The reaction that Richard mentioned, transesterification, is a catch-all phrase for any conversion of one ester to another, but we basically convert glycerol esters or esters of glycerol into methyl esters or esters of methanol, and we do that by reacting this triglyceride with 3 methanol molecules. The byproduct is glycerol, that has its own uses, and then the methyl esters, which are now much smaller and much lower viscosity than the starting fat or oil, becomes biodiesel or is biodiesel. Here's another molecule picture, and I'm showing you this just so that when we do the renewable diesel slide, you'll understand how we can make such a different fuel from the same starting materials. So this is a fatty acid, oleic acid. It has oxygen atoms in it, those red atoms, red spheres there. We react with methanol to make a methyl ester. So in this case, it's methyl oleate. That would be biodiesel. We can make biodiesel from any oil or fat, as Richard mentioned, and I'm building on. And the reason this matters is one of the topics I wanted to make sure to cover today was why biodiesel is different today than it was before, because biodiesel has been around for about 20 years in the US in quantity. And in the early days, we, the producers, didn't know a lot about the finished fuel and what might happen in the world. And there were some problems, particularly in the 2005 kind of time range, where new adopters of biodiesel did have filter plugging issues. And this was because largely of the minor components, what we'll call minor components or impurities that are in the fats and oils, and those can make it into the biodiesel. So the minor components from feedstocks can impact biodiesel quality. So I don't want to deny anything people have heard about historical issues with biodiesel. Certainly over the last 10 years, we've made very, very large strides in biodiesel quality. So that's the one thing to reassure everyone today is when we talk about biodiesel that's in the marketplace, it is actually very, very different than what was produced in the mid 2000s and late 2000s even. So quality control has been taken extremely seriously. The minor components in the feedstocks have been dealt with. There's essentially 2 ways that it's done at biodiesel production facilities. One is by filtration, and the filtration or adsorption options have gotten much better, which means the quality of the fuel is better. And the other one that my company, REG, has been adopting is distillation. So we've been distilling our biodiesel, which makes it a distillate. And this is a very major step in the quality control arena because it gives us fuel that essentially doesn't have any of the minor components that were concerns back in the day. So just know that biodiesel quality is not what it was before. So any either personal bad experiences you had 10 years ago or things you've heard about are now a thing of the past almost everywhere. And if they're not, they will be soon. So the ways we've done this in addition to technology and innovation or technology investment is to improve our quality control as well. So it should be common now to get a certificate of analysis from a producer for biodiesel that's produced. Almost all producers do this, produce certificates of analysis and test their tanks before releasing. So in that regard, biodiesel is actually treated more like jet fuel than conventional diesel. Petroleum diesel does not get certificates of analysis on individual sealed tanks. At ASTM, a new grade of biodiesel has been added to the ASTM D6751 standard. So if someone is concerned, has a high sensitivity application, you can actually refer in contracts to the number 1B grade in 6751, which has better cold properties and purity properties. And then I also like to point out to folks, there's a test that Canada, in the Canadian biodiesel standard, which is this mouthful here of letters and numbers, has a test called the cold soak filter blocking tendency test, shorthand CSFBT test. And that is the first commercially available test that actually looks at biodiesel blending with a petroleum fuel or a hydrocarbon fuel. So it's not a test of the straight biodiesel or B100, it's a test of a blended fuel. And it's a very good test at showing you the potential for filter blocking problems in the field. It's not in the ASTM method and it's not required, but it is an available test that can be referred to in a purchasing standard. So just know that there is a way to kind of guarantee biodiesel quality control even beyond what ASTM allows. The benefits of biodiesel are mostly related to the fact that the fuel molecules still have oxygen in them. So that gives a different kind of emissions reduction than renewable diesel can offer. Oxygenated fuels are really good at reducing hydrocarbons emissions because you get such good combustion and because they're not hydrocarbons themselves. And then the particulate matter reductions are even more dramatic than those with renewable diesel. Also very good at reducing carbon monoxide, which occurs when combustion occurs with not enough oxygen. So just know that the fact that biodiesel is an oxygenate actually gives it some unique benefits that we can't get any other way. And then the other thing that those oxygen atoms do at the top of the molecule is they give it its excellent lubricity. So it adds a little bit of polarity to the molecule, which makes the lubricity off the chart. So biodiesel is actually a better way of getting lubricity into your fuel than the conventional lubricity additives, whether your hydrocarbon fuel is petroleum diesel or renewable diesel. Biodiesel is a very safe material. When it's B100 form, it is essentially vegetable oil from transport and handling requirements. And as mentioned by Richard, these three fuels, biodiesel, renewable diesel, and petroleum diesel, can all be blended at any level that the customer wants to use. 20% is a common blend level because that's where the ASTM standard for blended biodiesel stops. But we do have quite a few customers who use more than 20% biodiesel. And then once again, I want to highlight that Canadian CSFB test if you're concerned about biodiesel quality in your blending. So that's biodiesel and the unique benefits of it. Renewable diesel, as Richard touched on, is made from a different process. It's actually made by conventional hydrotreating processes that are used to remove sulfur from diesel fuel. When you react that same triglyceride with hydrogen, you end up making 3 hydrocarbon molecules, in this case paraffins, from the fatty acids. And instead of making glycerol, we make propane. So there is a small amount of renewable propane that's a byproduct of renewable diesel production. Some refineries are set up to combust that on site to lower the carbon intensity of their process. Ours happens to have been, I believe, the only one that was designed that's in operation today that actually makes the propane as a separate product. Hydrotreating takes that same oleic acid feedstock molecule, reacts with hydrogen. Our little dumbbells here are hydrogen atoms. When you do that, you remove the oxygen atoms as water. Remember that those oxygen atoms gave biodiesel its unique benefits. But by removing them, you change the molecule into a hydrocarbon. So that makes it identical to the definitions for hydrocarbon fuels in ASTM D975, which is the diesel spec. You also do saturate this double bond. I won't go into the detail there, but what it means is this paraffin actually, as produced by hydrotreating, has a very high melting point. So there is a key additional step that has to be done in renewable diesel production. If not, you end up with a very paraffinic or waxy fuel. But that last step is isomerization. And so all the standalone renewable diesel producers today in North America do isomerization as well, which is what lowers the cloud point to the levels that Richard referred to. So crude fat or oil, hydrotreated to make a very clean and very clean burning, but very high cloud point material. This is white looking because it's frozen. It's solid at room temperature. But then we isomerize it to make a low cloud point finished renewable diesel. So renewable diesel at a high level is categorized as a paraffinic fuel. It's isoparaffins, as I mentioned last slide, but paraffinic fuel. But that's what gives it such a high cetane number. We guarantee it. Everyone guarantees it above 65. In reality, it's closer to 80. Or above 80 even, and that cetane number is an indicator of combustion quality. So you get really clean burning, nicely burning fuel. It's a hydrocarbon fuel. That cetane and that hydrocarbon nature of the fuel, the paraffinic nature, gives it extremely low NOx. So biodiesel is better for particulate matter and hydrocarbons, but renewable diesel is much better for NOx. And it also, of course, has very good particulate reductions and carbon monoxide. And it's hydrotreated so deeply it has no sulfur to speak of. Cloud point is very good. Some renewable diesel does go as low as -15 and it can even go lower. Most of the fuel in the market that is moving into California and the West Coast right now is in that -10 to -12 C, but Richard is correct, it can go lower. And then of course we can blend it with biodiesel and renewable diesel. So this is kind of the high level summary slide. We start with animal fats and vegetable oils, used cooking oil, animal fat. We can react them with hydrogen to make paraffins, which is renewable diesel, or we can react them with methanol to make methyl esters, which is biodiesel. The biodiesel still has the oxygen, and our co-products are a little bit different. Renewable diesel meets the diesel spec, D975. Biodiesel meets the biodiesel spec, D6751. So given the fact that these fuels are different and that the molecules themselves are slightly different, even though they're actually really similar in many ways, but that oxygen is a big deal, we thought it seemed like a natural marriage to blend them together, because then you can actually get the benefits of each of them. They are complementary benefits. They are not, you can't get the same benefits from renewable diesel that you get from biodiesel and vice versa. So we have a line of products called REG Ultra Clean or REG Ultra Clean Diesel, which are blends of biodiesel and renewable diesel that are available right now. We have a lot of customers using 20% biodiesel and 80% renewable diesel in California. In Oregon and Washington, we have some customers using 50-50 blends of the two. And then I'll show in these emissions benefit slides what that means. So when we talk about emissions reductions, these slides are showing reducing emissions compared to petroleum diesel or ULSD. So a bar that's bigger is a larger reduction. Straight R100 is the blue bars on the left. So good hydrocarbon reductions, but the blends, as we add 20% biodiesel and then 50% biodiesel, we get big dramatic increases in hydrocarbon emissions. Now, modern Tier 4 engines have emissions control devices, so this will not represent what comes out of the tailpipe of a Tier 4 engine. It is what comes out of the tailpipe of an older engine, but it does represent what goes to your emissions control devices in a Tier 4 engine, and Richard touched on that. So we are not sending nearly as much particulate matter to the DPF, and we're not sending nearly as many hydrocarbons to the oxidation catalyst. So there are some benefits just by not loading up your emissions control devices, even for Tier 4 engines. But for what leaves the engine, you can see that adding more biodiesel does decrease the amount of particulate matter. Carbon monoxide is kind of a wash. They both are very good at reducing carbon monoxide emissions. And then of course, over on the far right, you see the NOx benefit. R100 definitely gives the best NOx reductions, and blends of biodiesel and renewable diesel up to 50-50 are still NOx negative. That's important to keep in mind. And then this dashed line is what would happen if someone were to take 50-50, B50R50, and blend it with petroleum diesel to a B20. So that's a B20, R20, P60. And in markets where there's a premium price for renewable diesel or scarce supply, this could be a very interesting fuel for folks because it's 40% renewable and it has really good emissions reductions, and it's a very nice fuel to use. Lubricity benefits, the other one I want to touch on here. It's important to note that renewable diesel is a great fuel, but it does have less lubricity even than old-fashioned petroleum diesel. So it does require lubricity additives, just like petroleum diesel. The best lubricity additive out there is biodiesel. At 2%, we get comfortably below the D975 maximum. And as we approach 20% biodiesel, we actually approach the value of wear scar value for B100. So really, by the time you get to about B20, you're almost as good as straight biodiesel, which right now is the best lubricating fuel available on the marketplace. So just know that the advantage of this is you don't need additional lubricity additives. Also, by adding a fuel component to provide your lubricity, you do not need to worry about, did that lubricity additive get mixed uniformly throughout my whole fuel supply, because the fuel itself is providing the lubrication. And then the last unique benefit I wanted to touch on before I move to my summary is that biodiesel blends with renewable diesel actually have a surprising advantage. We have been looking at REG at freezing point for years as an indicator of cold performance. Cloud point is a very conservative indicator, but freezing point is even more conservative. When people say, what do I need for my fuel to start it up on Monday after my school bus sits over the weekend? We have struggled with cloud point because cloud point sometimes doesn't actually, it's a little bit too optimistic. The jet industry, the airline industry, uses freezing point. Freezing points are typically 3 or 4 degrees Celsius or 7 or 8 degrees Fahrenheit higher than cloud points. So one of the things we realized early on, and it was a little bit dismaying until we saw that we had a solution for it, was that even though renewable diesel has a very low cloud point, its freezing point is actually kind of high. And that has to do with the paraffinic nature of the fuel and the fact that it doesn't have some of the components that diesel fuel has in it. But note that this dashed line is about where the freezing point of a winter pipeline grade petroleum diesel would be. Renewable diesel in and of itself, R100, is a little above that. This is Celsius, so that's about 4 or 5 degrees Fahrenheit. Biodiesel, of course, has a higher freezing point out here on the right. But it was very interesting for us to see that blends of the two fuels actually had a lower freezing point, not only than the straight renewable diesel, but also the petroleum fuel. Now, this would not apply to all biodiesel, but it does appear to apply to all renewable diesel. So lower cloud point or lower freezing point biodiesel can actually reduce the freezing point of renewable diesel. And that's a very interesting finding. So just keep that in mind, that even though B100 has a high cloud point and is not a good winter fuel for most folks, some amount of biodiesel can actually have a depressing effect on the freezing point. And I'm also promoting the idea of using freezing point as an indicator of your fuel storage concerns. Final slide here, just know that we have these performance benefits of biodiesel and renewable diesel, that they are synergistic, meaning the two go together. Biodiesel provides great properties for lubricity, also elastomer compatibility, very low PM and hydrocarbon emissions, while renewable diesel is the highest cetane fuel available and amazing NOx reductions. Blend them together to get the best cumulative or overall engine emission reductions. Freezing points can actually be better, surprisingly, than straight RD. And of course, you get that amazing lubricity benefit. And you know what? I remembered I do have one more, because emissions really, I think of emissions usually as tailpipe emissions or engine emissions, but greenhouse gas emissions or carbon intensity reductions is what people on this call I think are really interested in as the Clean Cities folks. So this is the same kind of information that Richard showed, just broken out a little bit more detail to compare to different transportation options. So petroleum diesel in California has a carbon intensity of approximately 100 grams of CO2 per megajoule. Best in class biodiesel for REG at least, we have a 12, which is an 88% reduction. Our renewable diesel is 19, which is an 81% reduction. This depends on feedstock and production technology, so it's certainly possible that renewable diesel could have better scores than this from other producers. But just know that these are both above an 80% reduction versus petrodiesel. Natural gas is not a renewable fuel, but it does have lower carbon because it has more hydrogen in the molecule. It provides only a 21% reduction versus petro. And electric vehicles, at least with the current US grid, are actually not better than biodiesel and renewable diesel. That's the main thing to show here. Now, there could be jurisdictions like state of Washington where they have a lot of hydroelectric power and your electricity is renewable. Of course, that would lead to a larger reduction. But current US grid average gives approximately a 34 carbon intensity or a 66% reduction. And that's actually with a favorable EER of 5. So just know that that's a favorable number. That is not putting the thumb on the scale there. So just know that, as Tammy said, really your best chance at reducing your carbon intensity is by using biomass-based diesel, either biodiesel, renewable diesel, or a blend of the two. So thank you all very much. I'm going to stop sharing and look forward to the rest of the presentations.
Next up, we have Brian Denninger, and he's the president of Dogpatch Fuels.
Dogpatch Biofuels is San Francisco's only LBE and WBE renewable fuels provider. We have multiple commercial card lock. We have on-site construction fueling and wet fueling for both public and private fleets. What really sets apart from our competition are two things. First, we specialize in renewable fuel blends and always have. So we're not a company you can come to and necessarily get petroleum products. And secondly, Julie Ginsburg and I own a company called Incredible Adventures. And Incredible Adventures is a adventure tour and travel company that has a large segment of transportation services. And we've been running that company since 1999, and we've been running on 100% non-petroleum fuels since 2000. So if you guys recall, David talked about the years of biodiesel, so to speak, and all the different challenges that people had going through them. So we were a fleet running that fuel back then. And again, I would like to reiterate that the quality of the fuel that you're using and putting into your vehicles, whether it be today, yesterday, is really important. We monitored that all along, so we did not see the issues that most people saw over the years. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that, you know, with renewable fuels, oftentimes we know the producer is a fleet owner, and we know them well. And so that allows us to think about where our fuel comes from, where if you're doing petroleum, you're not always exactly sure where that petroleum is coming from because it's in the pipeline. And it's coming from multiple different sources from overseas and refined at multiple different refineries. So I think if you're knowing your fuel, it's really important as a fleet manager and as a company to run efficiently and watch your bottom line. So I'm just going to do a quick overview from our perspective. And, you know, as a company that was based in tourism, one of our key components was looking at the environment and making sure that we could do the best that we can do to keep it looking pretty for visitors for years to come and even our grandchildren. And so for us, one of the biggest components of that was our carbon footprint. And so before people were really talking about carbon footprint and sustainable travel, we knew that it was an issue, and so we wanted to reduce our emissions, as that would be the biggest, most important thing we can do. So of course we looked to alternative fuels to do that. At that time it was biodiesel, and we're still a heavy advocate of biodiesel because of the emission profiles that have been pointed out from other speakers today. And as you can see, you know, the emissions that we were looking at and that I think Dave and both Richard did a good job of talking about are listed here in this slide. Also, as a fleet owner and distributor, one of the things that we want to be considered when we're looking at renewable fuels is how can we increase the supply? And that's not talked about a lot today, but as you saw on the slide that Richard put out, there's been a significant increase in people using renewable diesel, tightening up that supply. And from a blending perspective, I see an opportunity to increase that supply, not only increase that supply, but also rely on domestic resources to do that. So, you know, a biodiesel plant that is 1,000 miles from you, as opposed to across the ocean, or a renewable diesel plant that's here in the US. And by blending those fuels, that's really helpful. And from our perspective is really key in helping create energy independence and petroleum independence as well. Now, as a fleet owner, I thought Dave did a really good job of pointing out some of the engine benefits, and you know, having the years of experience, I think it's important to talk about. So I do want to talk about biodiesel a little bit and our sort of change from 100% biodiesel to a blend of biodiesel fuels, and our concern with going to 100% renewable diesel as a fleet owner, and our concerns about what that performance would look like on our engines. So prior to 2016, when CARB introduced legislation that didn't allow us to run B99.9, so nearly 100% biodiesel in our fleet anymore, and sell that to our customers, we had a real concern about what that would do to the lubricity, because biodiesel, as was spoken about earlier, has a tendency to be a very wet fuel. Therefore, it's really expanding the seals. What we did see coming out of that was, by going to 100% renewable diesel, that those seals shrunk past the point where they were efficient, and we saw some leaks. By blending the fuel, we were able to add in lubricity. Those seals were able to expand again, and the leaks went away in our vehicle. So it's really important to understand that keeping the right level of lubricity is great for your engine. It keeps it quiet. In our case, we visit places, and our customers visit places that we would really like to reduce sound and increase efficiency in our engines. And then, of course, we made the choice to use the REG Ultra Clean Diesel in the long term for many reasons. One was blending logistics, which we'll get into later. And two is it was a pathway that was created by CARB with a lot of work from REG, so that we could use that fuel legally in the state of California and in our fleet, as well as distribute it through Dogpatch Biofuels. So this is a slide that's provided by REG, and I just wanted to sort of talk about this because, as I talked a lot about biodiesel and why we thought it was important. In 2016, we were, you know, also quite disappointed because we were happy with the fuel. We thought the quality had gone up pretty good. Our customers were happy with the fuel, and we liked that the emissions profile on it was so significant on everything but NOx. And we thought that the reduction in hydrocarbons and particulate matter and carbon monoxide outweighed the potential of NOx problems, especially since all of our vehicles at that time had mechanical mitigation, which was going to reduce the NOx anyway. However, that's also what gave us a hesitation to go into 100% renewable diesel, because as you'll see in the next slide, that is similar, that is the slide that Dave showed us earlier. Um, you know, although there is a significant reduction in hydrocarbons, particulate matter, and carbon monoxide, it's not quite as significant as biodiesel. And we were trying to have the best reduction that we can. Now, of course, we were happy about the impacts of NOx, and so this helped make our decision on how we were going to use our fuels, why we were going to use our fuels, and how we were going to do it. Especially because the other major factor was, are we buying domestically produced fuels? There's also been a lot of conversation over the years about renewable diesel not being able to be mixed with biodiesel. And we, like I said, we weren't interested in 100% renewable diesel because of the emissions profile compared to biodiesel, in our opinion. And so we wanted to make sure that we could get the best fuel possible. And so we started blending in our in-tank site at our facility, and I'll explain about those blending logistics a little bit later, and why it's important from a logistics standpoint for your company, and not having to have the headache of blending in tank. Okay, so here we go, renewable costs and additional considerations. The cost of renewables, in our opinion, and what we've seen in the market, is very competitive. We've seen anywhere from a 0 to 2% reduction over ULSD over the OPUS index in the last year, and biodiesel at 10 to 15%. So this gave us added incentive to want to blend our fuels to reduce our overall cost, both to our customers at Dogpatch, as well as our own fleet at Incredible Adventures. Now, that doesn't necessarily reflect the amount you're going to be able to buy your fuel at, because each distributor will have their own models, and that'll largely be based on volume. So are you using 250 gallons a month or 50,000 gallons or more a month? We also, like I talked about earlier, saw a significant we saw a significant benefit in blending the fuels to increase supply and keep our costs down, and that was helped in December of 2019 with the extension of the blender's credit. Some additional considerations, and some of which we have talked about, is that we can help support domestic energy production. For us, this is really important as a company and to our core values to create jobs, especially jobs in areas that have lost jobs over the year in the blue collar sections of our country, and turn those into green jobs. And again, I talked about earlier that we are largely promoting energy independence, which was important for us at Incredible Adventures because we were in our second year of business at the start of the at the start of the Gulf War in 2001 after 9/11, which had a major impact on our business, and we wanted to do everything we could to not have to rely on foreign entities for that. The other main thing I think I'd like to talk about here is that you know, when you're making a decision for your fleet or your community or your jurisdiction, you have to look at the transportation chain all along the way. And for us, moving to 100% renewable diesel at the time was challenging because we knew that most of that fuel was coming from overseas. And we knew that the transportation emission cost of shipping barges across on 6 oil, which is a really tarry bottom crude and inexpensive, so cheap to move stuff on overseas, was not exactly what we wanted to promote in the cleaning of our oceans, as well as just the overall global environment of the impacts of carbon in the atmosphere. Finally, it's not on this slide, but I would like to touch base on COVID-19. What we've seen with people, you know, sheltering in place and not going to work is a real reduction in our air. And I think it's important as we move out of COVID-19 as jurisdictions to remember that, and how are we going to protect that moving forward. And I think it's the responsibility of both our public entities and our private transportation entities to look at alternative fuels that will help continue to reduce carbon in our atmosphere. And I also think it's important that we get to a place from a city and jurisdiction standpoint that we're promoting people to get back into public transportation once it's safe, to promote companies to get their transportation up and running where they can have multiple people on the same vehicle going to work. What we want to avoid in the long term, I think, is having more people driving their individual cars because of the results of wanting to keep themselves safe. So when we get to a point where we can safely use public and mass transportation as well as private transportation within companies, I think it's imperative for us to keep our environment clean. Okay, so as I said, we started blending our fuel in 2016. At that time, there wasn't really a pre-blended fuel that you could have in your fleet. So we have some pretty good experience of what it takes to blend in tank. And when we're talking about blending fuels, we're really looking at three different methods of blending fuel. Two of which are in-tank blending and one is inline injection blending. The top two, if you're in an area that I have listed here, which is a two-step in-tank blending and a three-step in-tank blending, they're really helpful if you don't have the opportunity to buy fuel coming out of the terminal to put into your tank. But I do think it comes at a logistical cost, both from time and energy of your employees, as well as the fuel is not quite as stable as it would be using a quality biodiesel like REG's distilled biodiesel, and in terminal inline injection blending. So in the case of the two-step, depending on whether you have a top load or bottom load tank, this could be in truck or in a fixed tank, as you see here. If you're bottom load, you want to load the biodiesel first and the renewable diesel second. And if it's top load, you want to load the renewable diesel first and the biodiesel second. Now, this is important to think about from a logistical standpoint, because if you're running your own fleet with the fixed tank or you're distributing fuel, in particular, I want to talk about the fixed tank, is you have your employees sitting there waiting for two trucks to come in with two fuels from different sources. And it just takes a lot of time. This is a 3 to 4 hour process, lining the trucks up, making sure they're coming in the right order. So it's not an ideal situation. And I would really like people who are looking at, switching to renewable fuels to think about that and to depend on their distributor to have that fuel come in a blend that will reduce your cost overall. Again, I'm not going to touch a lot on the three-step process. This is more for smaller tanks that are in the field where you might layer the fuel in, RD, biodiesel, RD, and this allows you to get the most consistent blend. But again, if you're a fleet owner or a distributor, what you want to do is have the highest quality fuel in the most stable condition. And so the best way to do that is to make sure that you are buying and having distributed to your location injection blended fuel or terminal inline injection blended fuel. There's a couple of different methods of this. So that's a main line into the main tank or the terminal, which you're injecting the amount of biodiesel you want into the renewable or the petroleum diesel. And two is a two line going into the same tank. This is preferred because it helps stabilize your fuel. And if you're using a high quality fuel, along with either regular diesel or renewable diesel, allows you to maintain those products in solution much better than in tank blending. And so, I wanted to, again, thank everybody for joining and all the really detailed information we got from Richard and Dave so far. It really explains a lot on the technical aspect, and I hope that I was able to demonstrate to the group that picking your distributor is important, picking your producers for biodiesel and renewable diesel or even petroleum diesel, and having it pre-blended and delivered at your site or in whatever use you're having really saves you cost in the long run. Thank you for your time.
Wonderful. Brian, thank you for your great presentation. And up next, we have Rick Wallace. He's a Senior Policy Analyst for Oregon Department of Energy. Rick, take it away.
All right, thanks. I hope everybody's doing well. I saw a lot of familiar names on the list there. We're all working in our new virtual worlds now. I'm in my basement. It's really exciting here. Anyway, the first picture that I want to show you here is from a board member. I want to give a shout out to him. It's Gary Lynch at Eugene Water and Electric Board. This is a fuel island that he used some state incentives to put in, and he's been running biofuels out of this island for years now. E85, R99, all different blends of, you know, R20, whatever the market, he could kind of get in there. Interesting guy. He's actually even trying E20 on just the normal cars that can't do E85. So he does a lot of interesting things. I'm going to start. They asked me to, and now if I can get this thing to change, and it's not. There we go. I'm going to start looking at the overall market, and people wanted me to look at this. Now, this is one of my favorite things that comes out of the short-term outlook that comes out of EIA, and it's looking at world production and world consumption. And, you know, price really depends on this balance. If you see it get out of balance by 1 or 2% for a couple quarters, it really can affect the price. And of course, what we saw recently, we kind of had the perfect storm with Russia and Saudi Arabia getting in a bit of a match with each other and decided to try to get more market share by oversupplying. And then the US producers also keep producing more, and world demand was beginning to come down a little bit. But when COVID hit, it just slammed everything to the wall. And you can see this is pretty drastic, what's happened here. And so, you know, by this chart, it looks like we won't be balanced until maybe Q3 or so. Here's another chart that's showing the same thing from Rystad, but they're showing not showing a market balance until about Q4 or so. Now, you know, these curves, there's a lot that's going to affect these curves. COVID-19, of course, has had an enormous effect on the world's economies and their energy consumption. If a second wave materializes, then we could see further demand reduction. This could make for a bumpy curve going forward. You know, how fast will demand resume? Now, we've seen it actually coming on pretty strong, but it's still going to take a while. There's still a lot of businesses that aren't up to steam. Some are, but quite a few that aren't. So how fast will demand catch back up? Can OPEC Plus keep their production down? I mean, a lot of times, you know, they have these agreements, but they don't always keep them going. And U.S. production has been slowing, but as price goes back up, are they going to ramp back up? Because West Texas Intermediate was up to $38 this week. That gets to a point where a lot of these guys can start making money again, and a lot of them are heavily in debt. They need to make they need to have some supply coming out to satisfy that debt. Also, what's going to affect all this is there's a lot of storage out there. Even if we get the market balanced, it's going to take a year to probably siphon off a lot of that storage. So we're probably looking at low prices, I would assume, through at least the end of 2021. So the next couple of years, if you're a fleet guy, at least you're going to enjoy a little bit of a lower price at this point. Now, here's another look at this. You know, demand bottoms out at about 72.8 million barrels in April. It's estimated to rebound to 98.9 in 2021, but that's still lower than what it was last year. Now, the average demand for 2020 is supposed to be about 88.8 million barrels a day. That's a drop of 10.8% globally. So that's pretty big. Now, this shows the areas that we've seen. You can see that gasoline and jet fuel in particular got hit pretty hard as far as demand. Distillate, not so much. I mean, because, you know, we still had consumer, you know, we had to get products to stores, we had e-commerce, we had all of that. So it didn't get quite hit as hard. Now, this causes a bit of an imbalance with finished products at a lot of refineries because they're usually designed to make more gasoline than distillate. However, jet fuel and distillate are fairly close, although distillate's a lot cleaner than jet fuel, so it has to go through more process. But at least it's kind of in that the gravity and such is a little bit similar. But you can see that we had some real demand destruction going on. Here's Western States retail diesel prices. What's interesting about this, you can see it all dipping down, but you know, this is over a few years here, 2018, 2019. Typically this time of year from March out to October, we see prices rising and everything, and they're continuing to go down and stay flat. So we probably won't see that. It's going to be interesting to watch to see where we end up here. So the reason, you know, here I am at a biofuel webinar, and I'm talking about petroleum. Well, the reason I am is because the price and demand really does kind of follow petroleum, as this chart shows. This is from the alternative fuel price report that comes out of AFDC. A lot of you coordinators submit data for this report and so on, so you're very familiar with it. But you can see that it really tracks fairly well. And this is a US, by the way, US retail diesel price compared to biodiesel B99. Most of the fuels do track fairly well, even though it's different commodities, it's different everything. But because it's blended in and demand all kind of fits together, they do fairly much follow each other. So at this point, I'd like to start talking about, really get into the what we want to talk about here, and that's the biofuels. There are several policies in place, and particularly diesel is where we're going to focus, of course, you know, biomass-based diesel, which is both renewable diesel and biodiesel. There are several incentives and policies that are changing this whole marketplace, particularly out here in the West. The first I want to talk about is the federal RFS. This has been around since 2005, and then in 2007, they added to it, they made it stronger. These are RIN prices from this year, January through April. And you can see the middle there, the green and yellow lines, that's the D4 and D5 RIN. This is typically what we see biodiesel and renewable diesel run at. Now, a RIN is based on the energy amount that's in a gallon of ethanol. So because these fuels have more energy in them, they get more than 1 RIN per gallon. So renewable diesel gets about 1.7 RINs, and it's 1.5, I believe, for biodiesel. So at the current market price of about 50 cents a RIN, renewable diesel is getting about 85 cents, and biodiesel is getting about 75 cents a gallon. Now, next, that was pretty exciting that happened at the end of 2019 was a bill that came out of Congress, Consolidated Appropriations Act. And what this did was extend the biodiesel tax credit, which also includes renewable diesel, regardless of the name, through 2022. But it also went back because it actually had lapsed at the beginning of 2018. So it went back, so producers could go back to 2018 and 2019. It's good for 2020, 2021, and 2022. This is the first time that they've actually done this credit for this amount of time. And you can see that, you know, it's really important that we have that. You can see that it's over the years, it's grown. And one of the amount of diesel, biodiesel and renewable diesel, that's what the chart is, when you see it ramping up, is going up. And that's partly because of this program. I mean, it really does help the producers to be competitive, so on, throughout the whole US. You can also see what's interesting about the biodiesel one is the seasonality of it. And I think a lot of that has to do with cold flow properties and so on. Renewable diesel is slowly ramping up, but I think you're going to see that start ramping up even further coming up. This credit is $1 a gallon. It goes towards their tax liability. Once that is satisfied, then they actually get paid $1 a gallon for those products. Now, in the West here, we have, here in Oregon, we have a clean fuels program, which is much like the California low carbon fuel standard. I'm from Oregon. I'm going to talk about, of course, the Oregon program, but a lot of it can be shared. Now, what you're seeing here is the average price per credit, the orange line, and then the blue bars are the amount of credits that are being traded over time. We're just starting our program. California is a much more mature program. They've they're up around the cap of $200. Our programs has a similar cap. Both programs are very similar and they're written. There's a few little nuances that are different, but these are very much the same. We've averaged about $130 a metric ton over the last 2 years. Carbon intensity is about 30 grams. In 2020, it would take about 117 gallons of RD, of renewable diesel, to generate 1 credit, 1 metric ton reduction. And so that would be about $1.11 a gallon. So you put all 3 of these things together, and these producers or blenders or so on, they can get about $3 a gallon when you add these up together. The interesting part about the programs and all of the, of course, the market signals we're sending out there is we're seeing a reduction in carbon intensity. So ethanol's reduced about 13%, biodiesel 34% over the last 4 years, and renewable diesel's reduced about 16% over the last 2 years in carbon intensity in the market. Now, as far as gallons, we've also seen a lot of gallons increase into the state. As you can see here, in 2019, we had quite a big jump. And this is because we're sending that market price out there. They know they can send it here. And it has a market, and they can actually collect more money. So what has that done for price? This is looking through 2019 through 2020. R99 is the green line. This is out of the rack out of Eugene. This also has a margin and a applicable tax applied to it. But you can see it tracking really close to B20 and B5. We have a RFS in the state that requires B5 as a minimum. So you can see it's very competitive now in price to run either of these fuels, B20 or R99. In California, they have R99 is actually cheaper than diesel. This is also out of the alternative fuel price report from the FTC. And this is because they have an added program, cap and trade, that has another incentive on top of the other 3. And so you see these things actually work, and they're bringing the scale, they're bringing fuels to market. So key takeaways. Impacts from COVID have reduced demand, and oil industry was unable to adjust supply quickly to balance the sector. Less demand and oversupply have caused crude prices to fall. Of course, this has affected everything else. Diesel demand is not anticipated to recover till later this year or next year. Biofuel prices tend to track these. Multiple federal state policies are increasing the availability and pricing competitiveness of the overall market on the West Coast. So that's it for me. If you have any questions, I don't know if we're going directly to questions or what we're doing, but I'll leave that up to Tammy.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rick. As always, it's so interesting and engaging to hear about the world of fuels as they relate to us locally and also internationally. Michael Graham is going to actually fill the question and answers for us next. So Michael, go ahead. I know that you've been following the great dialogue that's been coming up, and we're excited to hear some specific questions and open that up to our panelists to answer. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I wanted to cycle back to a couple of the questions that were in the chat box. We've been keeping track of those, and then we'll open it up to some other questions and answers. So John Licht had a question: is REG planning to produce renewable diesel out of their Hokewee and Washington plant in the near future? I think that's a Dave Slade question.
Yeah. All right. Well, so unfortunately, we are a publicly traded company. I cannot comment on that. It's too early for that. It is true, and it was a public record that we were looking at a facility north of there in Washington State. Those plans are currently not proceeding. But unfortunately, I can't comment any further on where we might be looking to do more. We are definitely looking to produce more renewable diesel, though, as are many others.
Very cool. Another question was from Dana Visse. For those who use renewable diesel, how has that impacted your fleet's overall miles per gallon compared to ULSD? And kind of a tag on to that seemed to be, what are some of the fuel efficiency benefits, or are there any benefits for using renewable diesel in terms of fuel efficiency?
I guess I'll jump in here, and I think Dave probably has some insight here too. I do know that there were 4 studies, different studies about efficiency conducted. I do not have the studies off the top of my head, but I can provide those later. 2 of the studies showed that there was no significant difference, or it was a neutral impact, that the gas mileage of blended fuel or renewable fuel was the same. And one study showed with the blended fuel that there would be about a slight decrease in fuel efficiency, and the 4th study showed there was a slight increase in fuel efficiency. And the result is that you're getting the same efficiency as petroleum standard diesel with blended fuel or renewable diesel with different blends as well. In our experience at Incredible Adventures, we have not seen a reduction in fuel efficiency as far as miles per gallon over the years, even with straight biodiesel, that we thought was significant. What we did have was some slight power reduction in 100% biodiesel. However, in the blends, it seems to us that at least our drivers coming back from the field after switching from biodiesel to the renewable biodiesel blend, that we actually improved our power, and we towed trailers with all kinds of gear and all that stuff. So that's just a little insight that I have there, just practical application.
Did you have any follow-on thoughts, Dave?
Oh, just to support Brian's point, the published studies show at B20 or less no measurable fuel economy drop with biodiesel blends, and then the renewable diesel biodiesel blends, even though they would have lower energy per gallon, there's some comments in the chat that I agree with that show that when DPF regenerations are included, that because the particulate matter produced by both of those fuels is so low, that there actually could be some savings by using less fuel for regenerations.
Very cool. Question from Eric Strid. What are the expectations for long-term costs as volume ramps up? Any cost limits of feedstocks or processing? Not sure if that was targeted towards one fuel or the other. I'll leave it open to anyone who has thoughts on both fuels.
Michael, it's Richard. Since the fuel producers didn't jump on that one, I think it's pretty obvious as the production goes up, the costs are going to come down. But I think the dynamic that we're going to see is the domestic production as it increases. And keep in mind, you got some big petroleum companies getting into renewable diesel: Shell, Valero, Tesoro. I don't say that in any particular order. I should probably do them alphabetical. But when the big players get in, they don't have the cost for transportation that the overseas renewable diesel producers have currently. Sorry, Matt from Neste. So you're going to see some serious market competition. I don't know if that's going to offset the incentive that the low carbon fuel standard offers. I think it's going to make a big difference. But the thing is, once production exists to meet California's demand and exceeds that, then those excess gallons have to be sold somewhere. And then you're going to see additional cost competition. Folks will probably go to California first because LCSF and RIN gives a better return on your investment. But once that production capacity is exceeded, then you're going to see some cost competition in these other states. And the discussion in the chat, I mean, it's right on. Then you're going to see production facilities that are located nearby. Again, they don't have those transportation costs. So it's going to be an interesting dynamic, but I don't think we're going to see that for another 2, maybe 3 years. And my crystal ball is broken, but that's what I see.
Very cool.
Yeah, I'd just like to add on that, we're seeing quite a bit of it like the refinery over in Sinclair has in Montana or Wyoming, you know, they're using soy. Quite a few folks are using soy. Soy is pretty cheap right now because mainly of the tariff war we're having with China. We used to send a lot there. So we've got a lot of excess. So the industry's kind of enjoying the low price there. We've got ConocoPhillips up, one of the 4 refineries up in Washington. They're making an R20 blend and sending it down the pipeline to us. That's out of tallow, and they found a good source for that. So I think Richard's right. It's going to take a few years. The money's there for them. It's about scaling up all of the networks, putting all those pieces together to move your the resource to where you need it, and that kind of thing. But it is in process, and we've been watching it being put together, and this is why we're seeing the prices come together here. It's getting very close to ULSD at this point.
I had one more question before I open it up, and we'll have folks unmute as they have questions or raise their hand. Dave, quick question for fleets. We've got some fleets here in the Oregon area that are on the east side using or looking into using renewable diesel, and they're curious whether they should weatherize their fuel in the winter months, and if so, what should they do to weatherize?
So that is a really, really good question. I mentioned renewable diesel's freezing point as an indicator. You know, we at REG, we've been trying to use freezing point, which if anyone is curious about testing their fuel for that, it's a jet fuel test. The lab might be a little bit confused, but just say, yeah, I know it's diesel. I want you to run freezing point. So you can get your fuel tested for freezing point, which is a good way to evaluate cold flow additives as well. One of the concerns with both biodiesel and renewable diesel is that conventional petroleum cold flow improvers aren't really designed for those fuels, and it may be a while before we see anything that really works. So the thing we have been encouraging folks to do who want to use renewable diesel or biodiesel in cold conditions is use petroleum diesel as your cold flow additive. Essentially, it may mean you can't use 100% of either one of them in really cold conditions. So use as much petroleum diesel as you need to get your CFPP or your cloud point or your freezing point where you want it. It also allows if you get enough of it above, say, 20% petroleum in there. So by the way, I'll back up. That's kind of an odd idea for people to think about putting in 10 or 20 or 30% petroleum diesel into their fuel as a cold flow improver, but it really does work. But if you get above, say, 30% petroleum in there, now your conventional cold flow additives have a chance to work as well. So you kind of get into that spot where you can use your additives again, but that would be something that we would only need for really cold conditions. I think for certainly the West Coast, you know, the west side of the state, you're going to be okay without having to do that. But yeah, mountains and east, I just encourage people to consider biting the bullet and using petroleum as your cold flow modifier.
And Dave, another question that Peter mentioned in the chat box, are you able to elaborate on that? And the question was, or I guess the point rather was, petroleum refineries in Washington are marketing co-refined diesel as renewable diesel. These are not the same. Important to understand the difference. Can you elaborate?
Yeah, I'd love to if we have time. So co-processing we didn't touch on. The fuels we're talking about so far have been standalone produced fuels. I mentioned in my presentation that isomerization of those paraffins was a key step into making a really cold weather type renewable diesel. The one challenge with co-processing is that the renewable feedstock is typically included in the hydrotreater and you get the straight paraffins. So you get the N or straight chain paraffins out. Now, co-processors aren't usually running more than 5 or maybe 10% renewable feedstock anyway, so your co-processed fuel isn't going to be more than, say, 5 or 10% renewable. But I've tried to point out to people in the past that 5 or 10% renewable will be N paraffins or straight chain paraffins, and so the refinery has to manage that. But just know that there could be an increase if someone really is pushing that renewable content in the paraffin content of the fuel. Also, the way they make up for that cold decrease or that cold property degradation is they would include more aromatics. So essentially, co-processed diesel doesn't give the emissions benefits that renewable diesel does or biodiesel does. So those emission benefits that all of us talked about will not come other than the GHG reduction because it's a low carbon feedstock. But other than that, your engine emissions or your tailpipe emissions will not be improved significantly with co-processed diesel, in my opinion.
One more question, sorry. If folks do have questions, please feel free to raise your hand. We'll continue. But Dave, one more question from me is for folks looking at at weatherizing their renewable diesel in colder climates. What are thoughts on using kerosene?
Yeah, so kerosene would be consistent, I think, Michael, with the petroleum product. And so whether it's number 2 or number 1, it's more of a cost benefit at that point. So I think, do some blending, get your cloud point tested, get your freezing point tested if you want to be really conservative, and then decide if it's worth the extra cost for the kerosene. But either number 1 or number 2 would work for what we were talking about. Either way, by including that petroleum component, you're adding back some aromatics, you're adding back some diversity of molecules that helps avoid freezing. And the last thing I'll mention is that diesel fuel, when it freezes, it doesn't freeze solid. It kind of gets slushy and bad. Both biodiesel and renewable diesel, when they in their neat form, they can freeze solid, and that is a difference between petroleum fuels. And so by adding in that petroleum component in the winter, you're trying not only to lower the cloud point, more negative, but you are also avoiding that tendency to freeze solid.
Okay, thank you. I will add, we will have a second webinar series coming up next week where we'll have some cold weather fleets highlighting their experience using renewable diesel and biodiesel and blends, and some of that expertise from on the ground operation. Rick, probably a question for you. What are the estimated effects of Governor Brown's executive order doubling our clean fuels program in the coming years? Are you able to speculate?
Well, you'd have to think that it's going to increase the marketplace for low carbon fuel. So as we can see, it's driving down the carbon content of ethanol, biodiesel, and renewable diesel because you get more money for the lower carbon products. So, we see that coming into the state. It also will increase the demand because we need more of them. It should be better, I think, for the alternative fuels altogether, even electric vehicles, regardless of what they are, propane, CNG, all of them. Just makes more of a market for them. I think we can easily do it. Right now, we're halfway through the current program, and we've got a lot more credits and debits at this point. So we've got a lot of banked credits. The program's working very well. It's not really costing that much per gallon, it's adding to the price for diesel and gasoline. So I think it can be done easily, and it'll just increase the amount of fuel we'll see.
Cool. Well, we're out of time. If you have lingering questions, please feel free to email those to us. I seem to have gotten through all of the chat box, and there are no more raised hands, so it seems like folks have had their fill of content. Again, thank you all to all of our speakers. I'm going to leave it to Tammy to wrap up here.
Wonderful. Thank you, Michael. And thank you to all our panelists. What a wonderful and engaging webinar this has been, and an exciting panel. And I'd also like to bring your attention to the screen. Please join us for the part 2 of our Introduction to Renewable Liquid Fuels on June 24th at 10 a.m. Pacific time. We'll dive a little bit deeper into this. Typically, we like to expand it as now we have an overview, and now we want to do a deeper dive into fleet experiences using renewable diesel, biodiesel, and blends. If you have any questions, please reach out to your local Clean Cities folks or any one of us on the list here. We're happy to answer any questions and direct you to additional resources. Again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you for everybody in the Clean Cities program that has worked to pull this program together. We're excited to continue. Thank you.
Thank you all.